I'm currently living in the UK after staying in the Philippines, so I thought now would be a good time to compare the pros and cons of each country. I've seen a lot of foreigners in the Philippines that only talk about the pros, which there are a lot of. There's a reason why we love it there so much. But I thought it would be good to have more of a balanced view and look at some of the realities between both countries and see what are the compromises of living in the Philippines and if it's really better living there compared to the West. I'm of course from the UK, but I've spent a lot of time in the Philippines. I lived out there in 2018 and 2021, with some extended visits in between. To compare these countries, we're going to be looking at different categories. First of all, cost of living. And this is where there's a bit of a misconception with the Philippines, because some people make out that everything in the Philippines is cheap, when it really isn't. If we look at grocery shopping at supermarkets, I often find it more expensive in the Philippines compared to the UK. Although saying that, that is not the cheapest way of shopping in the Philippines. It's much cheaper buying food at wet markets compared to supermarkets. As a foreigner, you can often be overcharged at these wet markets. And even then, there are still meats that are more expensive in the Philippines. For example, I find beef, and especially steak, more expensive in the Philippines compared to the UK. And then there are just random things that are more expensive in the Philippines, like deodorant, and then used cars are quite overpriced in the Philippines. There are vehicles that wouldn't even be allowed on the roads in the UK that are quite expensive to buy in the Philippines, especially in provinces. But then if we look at housing, this is where the Philippines is cheaper because it is so overpriced in the UK, especially around London. Whereas in the Philippines, even if foreigners aren't allowed to own land, it's cheap to rent out there. You can get condos for a fairly reasonable price in the Philippines. Even in Manila would be a lot cheaper than it would be in cities in the UK. But if you are married to a Filipino, you can buy land in the Philippines as a foreigner in a joint name. And it is so cheap in the Philippines. And this is where it could be cheaper to live out there, just because of how overpriced housing is in the UK. And then on top of this, there's all these luxuries in the Philippines that we would just never do in the UK because they're too expensive here, such as having a massage, my wife getting her nails done. I've even had a few pedicures in the Philippines, which I'd never think to do in the UK just because it would cost too much here. But in the Philippines, it's very reasonable. However, saying all this, the average income is a lot lower in the Philippines. I would say the cost of living in the Philippines is definitely a pro for foreigners, but if you're on an average wage in the Philippines, it's actually harder there. But of course, it is a cheap country to travel in, but to live in on a Philippine wage, it can be difficult. Now let's look at safety, and the first thing people think of when we talk about safety is crime. And if we look at this, I don't think there's too much difference between the two countries. If anything, I would say the Philippines is safer in this aspect. Because there's so much security in the Philippines, and the law does seem stricter in the Philippines compared to the UK, where you can get punished harsher in the Philippines. You cannot walk around in London nowadays with your phone out because someone will take it, and they always get away with it. But there is more to safety than just crime. In the Philippines, there's a real lack of health and safety. There seems to be more serious accidents with construction workers, electricians in the Philippines compared to the UK. And then there's road safety. In the Philippines, it is poor. I've witnessed firsthand in the Philippines road accidents, some quite graphic and serious. Fortunately for myself, I was never directly involved in them, I just witnessed them. The only accident I've ever been in was in the UK, and it wasn't my fault, but it wasn't serious at all. And then lastly, if we're looking at safety, we need to look at the natural calamities in the Philippines. This is what makes the Philippines a lot less safe, because of course the Philippines is one of the worst affected countries in the world when it comes to this. Recently there's been really bad typhoons, flooding, that has affected millions of people. And this is something you need to expect in the Philippines. If you're building a house out there, you need to make it as strong as possible to survive these natural calamities. However, saying all this, I would still say the Philippines is safe. It is not a dangerous country to travel in at all. However, if you look at everything I've just talked about, it is still less safe than the UK. Now I want to talk about natural beauty. This is less serious than the first two things I've talked about, but I think it's still worth considering when comparing countries. And the Philippines has hands down the most underrated natural beauty in the world. Whether it's Mayon volcano, the white sand beaches, or just incredible landscapes. In Bicol alone, there's so many areas of beauty you can explore. The UK does have some incredible natural beauty as well, but this is definitely a pro for the Philippines. But what I would say is a con for the Philippines, if you're in built up areas, there is a lot of pollution and rubbish everywhere. Some areas don't have rubbish collections like we have in the UK, and other parts of the Philippines would have as well. In the village I was living in, people had to burn their rubbish because there wasn't anyone that would collect it for them. And then also in cities, there's this strong pollution smell that you just have to live with. Whereas in the UK, for me, the air does seem a bit cleaner. Now I want to talk about day-to-day activities because there just seems to be so many more fun things to do in the Philippines. On top of this, the average shopping mall in the Philippines compared to the average one in the UK is so much better in the Philippines. There's just more things to do there. Hence the old saying of the Philippines used to be, it's more fun in the Philippines, because it genuinely is. Plus activities and just going out in general is a lot more affordable in the Philippines. One con I'd like to mention for the Philippines is that there are a lot of power cuts, especially if you're in a rural village. You're not always going to have electricity, and after a typhoon you can lose electricity for a long period of time. But for me, I like how a lot of people there aren't too dependent on electricity. It forces us to spend more time together as a family, maybe play board games, instead of just being glued to our devices. But of course, a lot of Westerners would find this to be a big inconvenience. And talking of electricity, I do find the internet tends to be a lot worse in the Philippines compared to the UK. Internet providers for your house aren't great. They often have outages and they're just really unreliable and not particularly fast. Your best option would probably be to have Starlink in the Philippines, although it is fairly expensive compared to other options. But for me, living in the Philippines, I don't need fast internet. I have other priorities, but if you do need that, that would definitely be a con for you in the Philippines. Now let's look at healthcare. In the UK, we do have a national health service, which is paid for by our taxes, but it means that if we have an emergency, it's not like the US where you have to pay a big bill, even for having an ambulance called out. It costs so much money in the US. In the UK, it's technically free, although it's not, because like I said, we still pay for it with our taxes. But at least it means if we have an emergency or if there's something we want to have checked, we don't need to put it off because it's not going to cost us any extra. I know in the Philippines they have PhilHealth, but it's nothing compared to the NHS we have. And also our hospitals in the UK are to a higher standard to what the ones are in the Philippines. I've been to hospitals in the Philippines. They're not that bad, but they're not as good compared to the UK. But I do feel for all the nurses and doctors in the Philippines, because so many of them are really underpaid for what they do. They're doing a really good job for the situation they're in. It's not their fault at all the hospitals in the Philippines aren't up to the same standard to what they are in the West. Now lastly, I want to talk about the people, because this is what really makes a country what it is. And to be honest, just so many people in the UK seem miserable. There's so many short-tempered people that easily get angry. You get road rage all the time in the UK, even if you didn't really do anything wrong. And I actually find it harder to connect with my own people in the UK compared to Filipinos. In the UK, we're not the friendliest at all, but it's the complete opposite in the Philippines. Filipinos are just so welcoming. Even if you're an outsider, they'll accept you in. It's so easy to connect with people in the Philippines. Filipinos are always so positive, even in difficult situations. And the people genuinely are the best thing about the Philippines. They're the reason why so many tourists keep coming back. So the people of the Philippines are the biggest pro by far. Finally, where would I rather live? This all comes down to family and sadly money. If all my family that I'm close with could move to the Philippines and I was able to earn the same amount of money in the Philippines as I do in the UK, absolutely I'd rather live in the Philippines. There are a lot of challenges there, like I've mentioned in this video, the natural disasters, irregular power cuts. But if you look past those and can deal with these challenges, the Philippines is a really appealing country to live in. Not just to visit as a tourist, but to actually stay there permanently. However, right now my family is settled in the UK. This is our home for now. So I don't want to sound like a hypocrite because I'm living in the UK, but saying that the Philippines can be a nicer country to live in. But this is just the situation I'm in right now. Sadly, it is difficult to find good jobs in the Philippines. Typically, the salary isn't very good in the Philippines. And right now I've got a stable job in the UK that I'm not in a position to give up. And then we've got a child as well who's settled in the UK. This is probably where he's going to have his education. And the education is good in the UK. I hope you enjoyed this video and or found it informative. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.